And so, to be able to increase that understanding, we need to look at what skills children will need to be able to learn and develop empathy. So, the first and most incredibly important step is to be able to name a feeling and describe what it feels like. And that sounds like a fairly straightforward thing, but there are so many feelings that overlap or that are very, very similar. It involves understanding perspective and context, and it's not always easy to reflect and think, what am I feeling? Is it frustration? Am I envious? Am I just tired? Am I overwhelmed? If I am overwhelmed, why am I overwhelmed? It's very complex, and we do become more adept at being able to understand our feelings and also to be able to express them. But when we start off learning empathy, it is quite overwhelming. You know that something's wrong or doesn't feel quite right, but it mightn't necessarily be easy to name it. So, to begin developing that skill of empathy, we need to start recognizing common types of feelings and common types of experiences. So, a very good place to start is looking at things that make you happy, or things that you might be afraid of, or things that are a favorite thing to you and maybe a few of your friends as well. And that's a way of giving a really nice, tight context and perspective that allows you then to build that empathy and to predict how you might respond in a particular situation or what you might be feeling. The understanding that everyone has their own thoughts and feelings and others can have independent thoughts and feelings is referred to as theory of mind. And it's a really important skill in understanding empathy, thinking that just because I have a passion for reading doesn't mean that everybody universally has that and shares that same passion. Um, it's also important to understand that these differences are important, and they also help define that sense of self identity as well. Um, then, what we can start doing is once we start talking about what we're feeling and giving it a name, we can then think about ideas about what might be a helpful response in a typical situation. So, if you see a friend and they're feeling fearful because there is a spider in the classroom and they don't like spiders, what would be a helpful response? And I've seen it many times in the classroom that you walk past, and everybody seems to, as a group collectively, respond with that emotional empathy of, ugh, yuck, rather than thinking of, oh, what's a helpful response. If this is a friend and someone that you do care about, it's nice to be able to think through, what can I do that is helpful to them? Say, it's okay, the teacher's going to take care of it. We could make suggestions as to why the situation might change. But having a helpful response does go a really long way in formulating that bond between you and others, because not all responses are helpful and some responses can exacerbate those feelings and make them worse. So it's really good to start talking about what helpful responses your child could have in just common everyday situations.
So, for me personally, one of the things that made theory of mind the most difficult was that I assumed the natural assumption that other people thought and acted like me. This, for a young autistic child, is just not a very good starting point. For most children, the starting point of, oh, another person must be similar to me is it's not exactly right, but it's fairly close. And then from there, we can build to other people have different preferences and might respond differently. For an autistic child, this is a real challenge because the other people in my class might react very, very differently to me. If I don't like hugs at all, then the idea of hugging someone to comfort them doesn't make any sense. Why would someone actually enjoy that? How could that possibly be comforting? So, this is where we can simplify it to those basic emotions. What does it feel like to be happy, to be sad? And then understanding that different people respond to those things in different ways. So the next step after that is to realize that if I want to comfort someone else, for example, I need to do what they will find comforting, not what I would find comforting. So once we understand that everyone is different and requires different things, it becomes easier to modify our behavior to be helpful in a social context rather than basing our behavior on our own reactions, which are usually quite atypical from the people around us.
Definitely. I had a similar experience where I really liked receiving feedback about a project I was doing or work that I was doing. And then I realized that not everybody feels the same way, that heightened focus and attention can actually make others feel a little bit insecure or uncomfortable. And what is intended to be a positive feedback process ends up being something that's actually quite unpleasant. And again, it's that understanding that many people naturally react a little bit differently in different situations, or view feedback, view perspective, view context in different ways. And it's so important, especially for school age children, that we try and match the intended process with the outcomes. So, for example, calling a child up onto stage in an assembly to give them recognition for something might actually be their worst nightmare. It might make them feel incredibly self conscious and really, really insecure when what we were actually attempting to do was recognize some really positive achievement. So I think it's important that we try and closely match that reward and sort of feedback and communication process.
So, Dr. Damien Milton in the UK came up with the concept of the double empathy problem, which essentially states that autistic people find it just as difficult to understand and empathize with the neurotypical population as the neurotypical population has trying to bridge that empathy gap with the autistic population. So empathy, when we teach it, it actually helps both sides of the equation. When we realize that other people feel things in different ways to myself, for example, it means that now I can understand better why some other people seem to misunderstand me all the time. And then I can help them to empathize with me. And that's an important skill as well.
As a parent, it's very important to also validate and accept your child's feelings. Um, One of the mistakes I made very early on in parenting was trying to use that particular moment in time as a teaching opportunity, and it's really not. Um, if your child is feeling afraid or scared or overwhelmed, it's so important to let them know that you recognize that emotion, that it has a particular name, and that it's okay to feel that way. The harm that I inadvertently did by trying to make it a teaching opportunity and saying, oh, there's no need to really be afraid of that, or there's no need to be so upset, that's quite a minor problem, was that I was accidentally teaching my child to doubt their experience. And I think it's incredibly important to validate that their experience is authentic and genuine and and important, so that they start developing a sense of confidence in understanding themselves. So while it was important to teach empathy by modeling and sharing feelings, and it's a really great thing to be able to say, oh, I'm so frustrated because this has happened and I was expecting something else. Or, oh, I'm really, really happy because this has worked out so well and we got to do this. Um, it's also important to understand and to share that there's a lot of flexibility in expressing emotions and expressing feelings, and that they are equally valid and just as important. You start to make connections then between feelings and thoughts and actions or your behaviors. And you can create opportunities to talk about feelings using your child's special interests. So if they've got a particular interest in manga or cartoons or film or uh, Pokemon or science, you're then able to build in some understanding and some dialogue about naming feelings and experiences. So let's talk about a particular sitcom and how did the character feel when that happened? Or what do you think they felt? How did they react? Do you think they coped with that well? Or do you think that was kind of an awkward situation? So just bringing up the opportunity to talk about feelings and how they appear. You can then identify when your child shows empathy and positively reinforce that behavior. So there can be some really lovely minor moments between siblings where one sibling is upset and the other sibling comes over and just puts a hand on their shoulder. You say, "Oh, that was great empathy. That was really comforting." And you showed that you understood what your little brother or sister was feeling.
Curiosity is one of the most powerful tools that we can use when trying to learn empathy. And the key to curiosity is that there is no goal, there is no lesson, there is no direction, there is no right and wrong. There is just something happening that we're curious about and we want to learn more. Unfortunately, sometimes when we try too hard to teach empathy, we end up trying to teach a lesson in which there's a right and a wrong answer. And when the child, for example, gets the right answer, we might be tempted to praise and say, "Yes, you got the right answer. Yes, that's what they're feeling in this situation." As soon as we introduce the idea of getting the right answer, it introduces the simultaneous flip side of that of there might be the opportunity to get the wrong answer. So the reason curiosity is so powerful is because we can just explore and everything is interesting and everything is great. It can also be an opportunity for you to get a better insight into what is going on in your child's head when they do this behavior. For example, I gave the example of someone who doesn't like hugs. um, there's an example in a book that I like around trying to show empathy by patting someone on the head, because that's how I was friendly to the dogs in the park. But when I did it to the other students in my class, somehow they were upset, and I don't know why they were upset. So, curiosity allows us to ask the question, what do you think might be happening here? And there are no wrong answers, and we can explore and we can look at multiple different perspectives because there's no one singular right answer.
Looking at difference and individuality in that way is very empowering when looking at teaching empathy and developing empathetic skills. Uh, the next strategy for that would be a process called social reflection. And social reflection is a process of critically looking at a situation and discussing that situation, what actions took place, what the outcome was of that behavior, and how it developed. So if we look at an example of that, we can say, well, in this particular situation, my child was incredibly frustrated. How did they respond in that moment of frustration? Well, they actually threw a toy against a wall. Then we have a discussion about, well, that could be considered an unexpected behavior. That's quite a strong physical response to what might have been a simple exchange of turn taking or just not liking the way that a game is unfolding. In that situation, we then have a bit of a chat and say, well, when we throw things, that creates an unsafe environment. And that's why I would consider that to be an unexpected behavior. Let's look at that unexpected behavior and imagine how that made your sibling feel when you threw their favorite toy away. What sort of feelings do you think that they might have experienced? Could they have been angry? Could they have been frustrated? And sometimes a really great way of teaching is by throwing in a really big curveball. So, do you think they were absolutely thrilled and excited? Um, it's something that doesn't make sense. And that is a really great way of drawing attention to the activity and also just checking in with your child and saying, well, how were they feeling and what do they think about the situation? Then what you can do is say, well, were there any negative outcomes for you? It's like, well, yes, when I throw a particular toy away, I can't play with it for 30 minutes afterwards. That's mum and dad's rule. So, how do you feel about yourself then? Well, at the time, I wasn't really feeling, I was just in the moment. But afterwards, I felt a bit embarrassed or a bit sad or, just a bit yuck. A bit yuck is an okay description as well. Um, and then the important part of social reflection is thinking, well, when you feel that way next time, what could we do differently? Now, that's the really unique step because it needs to be tailored to your child and it needs to be linked in with their strengths and things that work for them. Recommending that a child goes and has a drink of water or does 5 deep breaths may not work for your child, but it may work for someone else. So it's testing and trying different strategies for coping in a specific situation. So next time you feel frustrated, could you tap the toy 3 times? Could you do? Could you get up and turn around in a circle and sit down? Let's think of some things, and then it's a process of trial and error. So next time you feel frustrated when you're having a game, let's pick one of these things to try and talk about it outside of the situation. When your child's in this situation and experience the situation, that's not really the best time for a teaching moment. The best time for a teaching moment is when your child has had time away to process what has happened, and it allows them space to be able to think about their feelings and reflect on their feelings. And that's when you're likely to get much more engagement in social reflection. Otherwise, it can just be adding more information to an already upsetting or highly sort of emotional experience, and that's not going to be productive.
So the key to this whole process, right? Shannon has just described the process of what it looks like when it's working well. And there's a couple of things that can get in the way of this process. One thing is, how does your child feel about this conversation? If I feel like I'm being told off, if I feel like I've done something wrong, if I feel like I'm not good enough or I couldn't control my actions and maybe I'm feeling shame about what I've done, maybe I had a meltdown, maybe I did some things that I wish I didn't do. There's a lot of potential negative emotions around that that are going to make it really difficult for me to look at my own behavior because I feel so bad about it. So if we compare that to a situation where the purpose of this social reflection is actually something really positive. I was not happy with the situation. I was really upset and I don't want to have another meltdown like that, for example. I would like to have some friends and I don't understand why what I tried before didn't work. So when there's an internal motivation to do something differently, makes a world of difference compared to, well, there's an adult telling me that I should do something differently. And all of a sudden, now that the motivation is internal, I want to do better in this situation. I want a better solution. Then the adult is suddenly on my team and is helping me to achieve my own goal. And then we can do all of the steps that Shannon was talking about before in a really positive way that doesn't leave me feeling like I'm just being told off and I'm just no good at this stuff.
Also, keep in mind that to focus on your child's way of learning. So, for example, if they're a visual thinker, it's a great idea just to pop an A4 sheet of paper on the fridge and 3 dot points of here's something you could try next time. And then the next time the situation occurs, you can put a tick against the strategy that worked. And not only does that help your child when they're thinking about it later or the next time they simply go to the fridge, they see that they've got a tick against something that they've done. And that's just a little reminder that I tried something new and it kind of worked. And if you've got three examples there or three different strategies to try, it might also help you work out how your child's learning and processing so that then if one particular strategy's got 10 ticks and the others have only got one or two, there's a clear winner there that's working really well with your child. And it also teaches them that again, there's not necessarily the one correct way of doing things. And they're not necessarily wrong because they find it confusing or they're responding in a way that their siblings or their friends don't respond. Um, but they then can understand that, well, that's something that's really good for me, and I can take that away with me. And there's nothing more rewarding than seeing your child acquire a skill and then be able to use it and apply it independently. It's just it's a real win-win situation, and they're genuinely proud of that experience. And they're those little wins in day-to-day life that we're just holding out for. So it's a great way to teach empathy by just thinking about what the situation was, what happened, and just something you could do differently. Not suggesting that their behavior or their feelings are wrong, but that maybe the behavior was unexpected and what would be something that would work next time that would be expected. Understanding that those expectations help situations to flow a bit better.
So, when I was a child, I learned the message that my emotions were wrong because when I expressed them, they were inevitably socially inappropriate and I got a bad reaction from the people around me. So, part of empathy is the first step in empathy is understanding our own emotions, understanding emotions in general. So when I finally allowed myself to accept my own emotions and listen to my own emotions, that was the model of being able to then project that onto other people and realize that they actually do feel like me. We actually do have a connection. And to summarize again, the biggest difference that that made is that it turned the world from a big, scary, unpredictable place to one where I could most of the time know what to expect from people's behavior because I could understand the emotional context of each situation.
So there are three different types of empathy. We have emotional empathy, we have cognitive empathy, and then we have compassionate empathy. All of those skills can be taught and developed by simply breaking them down into identifying feelings and labeling those feelings. Once we have a little bit of an understanding of our own feelings and how we react, we might be able to then predict or understand expected responses to typical situations. That skill allows children to be able to feel connected and included and to be able to understand. And that is one of the key foundations for building good communication and positive friendships.